I want to talk for a minute about chapter 7, Doubt as Dissent,
Yes.
one of my favorite chapters. And I wanted to, I'm trying to frame this question right. First, I think it's important because it demonstrates for us that doubt shouldn't be a stopping point, that we need to move through it.
Yes.
And I think your chapter is helpful in teaching us how to do that. But you also talk about the intolerance that you have faced within the evangelical community in particular. Why do many conservative evangelicals view doubt as a spiritual deficiency?
Hmm. Well, look, there are all kinds of Bible verses that get quoted, right? Thomas, we call him Doubting Thomas, and Jesus says, or Peter, when Peter's walking on the water and sinks, Jesus say, "Why do you doubt?" So it's easy to take verses like that and make it sound like, the whole purpose of them is to tell us that we are not allowed to have questions about faith, questions about religious teaching. And one of the things I try to do in the book is to say, we make a mistake when we think that faith equals adherence to beliefs. I don't think faith is adherence to a list or set of beliefs. I think faith is an attitude of humility and trust in the face of mystery. And faith is an ability to say, I don't know, and to trust the goodness of God to help me. Faith is an ability to say, I'm imperfect, and I trust the grace of God to help me. And and because of our focus on beliefs, then we use beliefs as belonging markers. They're our marker. You believe this, this, and this, you're in with us. We're the only people who believe these 6 things. Our other group over there, they only believe 4 of the 6 things that we believe. And so every group begins to make itself special by its unique set of beliefs. And now if I doubt them, I'm showing disloyalty to the group identity. And I think that really complicates things for people.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, and that's where doubt becomes a kind of dissent, because doubt says, look, it's not just that I don't believe this, or maybe I do believe it, or maybe I'm not sure if I believe it, or maybe I don't even understand it enough to know whether I believe it. I just don't think this is the right way to reject people and accept people based on this condition of adhering to a statement.
Yeah. Group identity was another important aspect of your book, and it made me wonder if part of the angst or the anger that maybe a pastor might feel is that when a layperson is doubting, that in some way is reflective upon them, that they either haven't, that it's almost offensive. I think that you're not doubting God, you're doubting our core beliefs. You're doubting everything that makes us who we are. And that is, I think, can result in it being somewhat offensive.
And in fact, Eric, that really ties back to and makes clear something I don't know if I made clear enough before when I brought up authoritarianism, because it's the authority figure who requires those beliefs. So in a sense, to defect from one of those beliefs or to question one of those beliefs becomes an act of rejection of that authority figure's leadership. And so now it becomes a power struggle as well as an issue of belonging.
So I don't want to ask leading questions, but a part of this will be a little leading. Do you think that this applies to what we experienced on January 6th with group identity?
Very, very much so. Like, you think of the QAnon conspiracy that has made huge inroads in evangelical and charismatic Pentecostal churches around the country and around the world. It's just bizarre to me that there's QAnon spreading around the world. So yes, what happens is when you have been predisposed to believe what authority figures tell you, and when you've been predisposed to say you believe what people around you believe who you want to belong to, then it's very easy to get sucked into cultic groups. It's very easy to get sucked into conspiracy theories. And something that these groups share is they offer us beliefs that make us feel like the virtuous hero and give us some other group that we can hate and condemn as the villainous, reprobate. And so, it's just, to me, it's just ridiculous. But a whole lot of people believe that, especially in this QAnon conspiracy, that Democrats like to drink the blood of babies that they've sexually abused. I mean, you just think, how could any sane person believe this? But it happens. And people get sucked into groups where this is the thing to believe. And, the internet creates these rabbit holes where you hear enough to reinforce it and it becomes believable. And churches churches haven't taught people the skills of critical thinking.
Yes.
And the reason they haven't is because they don't think it's their job. But what's so interesting to me, you want to talk about quoting Bible verses. Paul says in 1 Corinthians 14, for example, in evil you should be children, but in your thinking you should be mature adults. So critical thinking is, something that we need,
Yes.
but we've done the opposite.
Yeah. Perhaps there's a little bit of fear there that critical thinking will lead people to doubt.
And it will lead them to doubt, and it will help them then find out what is worth believing and what is less worth believing.
Mm-hmm. Well, I have kind of a fun question here as it relates to the Revolutionary Love chapter. So I ask this question to a lot of people that I meet, and I always get interesting, different answers. But in reading that chapter, the question popped up. And so what I want to do is, it's sort of like a scenario. I want to present to you a scenario and get your initial reaction to that scenario. So we have Joe Christian and Joe Atheist. Joe Christian volunteers at a soup kitchen. He wants to do that because he wants to show God's love. He's well-intentioned. He feels like he's being obedient to social responsibility. Next to him is Joe Atheist. Joe Atheist also volunteers at the same soup kitchen. He wants to be also socially responsible, and he also genuinely cares for other people. What is the difference in the act of service between the two? So one says, I'm doing it for the glory of God, and the other says, I'm doing it because I want to be socially responsible and for all these other reasons. Is there any difference in the social responsibility aspect of doing that? What would it mean to do that for the glory of God?
Mm-hmm. Eric, as you create that scenario, I think of a story in one of C.S. Lewis's fictional works, where there is a person who has been a loyal soldier of this false god. And he dies and meets Aslan, who's sort of the Christ figure. And he's expecting that Aslan is going to reach out his paw and bare his claws and, cut his head off because he served the wrong god. And he welcomes this fellow into whatever the version of heaven is. And the fellow says, but I served, this other god. And Aslan says, any true service rendered to a false god, I take to myself. And any false service rendered to a true God cannot be, rendered to me. So it was Aslan's way of, and Lewis's way of saying, it may be less the words that people use and the actual intents of their heart that really matter the most, And so I think, to me, I would just want to say, isn't it wonderful that two human beings, a Christian and atheist, want to love their neighbors? And I would say, in their love for their neighbors, they're both glorifying God, whether they use that language or not, because God is glorified when human beings act like human beings. One of the early church fathers, Irenaeus, said, "The glory of God is a human being fully alive." And when people live with the fullness of life and love, that's I think honoring to God, whether they use the word or not.
Okay. That's good. That's a good answer. I want to ask you a tangential question because I think that you're passionate about this. And so it's a question that I continually am asking myself. And that has to do with race. I'm just curious, what can the white church do to help with what's going on out there?
Yeah. Well, the white church has enormous power and responsibility. So the first thing they need to do is to stop listening to other white people who are telling them that race isn't a problem. And they need to listen to people of color and really listen to their stories. And when they hear their stories, most white people are going to have defenses come up, and they're going to want to argue with those stories. Mm-hmm. And I think we as white people have to quiet that voice. That's the voice of all the other white people who've told us things. And we have to really let other people's stories get through to us. Just for example, Eric, last Sunday, I was at a vigil in a town nearby where it's a town where farm workers live, most of whom are Mexican, and a high percentage of whom are who are undocumented. And that's another whole story about how, the food that we eat is picked by farm workers who are undocumented. And that's because, it's for a whole lot of reasons. And it's not because the farm workers are bad. It's because of our system that loves to exploit free labor or underpay labor. But a man in that town put his 12-year-old son to bed and said to his son, "I'm hearing all kinds of voices in my head. I'm hearing angels and demons talk to me." So it was pretty clear this father was having a psychotic break. A few hours later, the son was asleep. The father had gone outside, grabbed a shovel, and was banging the shovel against the neighbor's house, yelling and screaming. So he was having a psychotic break. The police showed up, and in 13 seconds, the man was dead on the ground. He'd been shot. Now, you can't prove that he was shot because he was a brown man instead of a white man, right? But it's pretty clear to me that a white man having a mental episode has a higher chance of surviving an encounter with the police than a brown man having a mental episode. And we just see stories like this, happening again and again. We've got to listen to those stories. And instead of minimizing them or trying to fix them, we have to say, instead of saying this is their problem, to say, that's my fellow human being. And especially if I'm a Christian, that's my fellow human being. I've got to care about that person. That's Jesus Christ. That's the least of these. And as much as I do it to him, I'm doing it to Jesus Christ. If we were to do that, that would get us started on the right path. But until we listen, I don't think anything is going to get better, until we let our hearts really be touched. And then from there, it would be so good for us to build relationships. But the fact is, a white person who hasn't gotten in touch with his own privilege and supremacy and all of the things that he wasn't born with, they were drilled into him through parents and grandparents and teachers and so on, and television and all the rest. We white people need to understand, for us to be around people of other races, we bring them grief in 100 ways without even realizing it. So, we have to understand that we have a responsibility to listen and to be changed and to be humble. That's where I'd start.
Go ahead.
I was just going to ask, how does that make sense? And what would you add to that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I would implore my listeners to really hone in on that listening thing. That really took me a long time to get. Yeah. Like, I understood what it means to listen, but I didn't understand what it meant to listen in the way that, and hear.
Yeah. Yeah.
And not say anything and just take it in and try to empathize as much as possible and just really get I want to help. And so my initial reaction is, what can we do to solve this? It's a problem. And that's the wrong approach to take.
Exactly right. Exactly right.
Well, for a
I'll
white
tell
person, it is.
I'll tell you a story about this. I had a great honor once, 10, 15 years ago. I was with a couple of Native American friends, and they were going to this large meeting of Native Americans. And I think I was the only white person in the room. As I recall, there were 150 or 200 Native Americans, and they were having a discussion. So I was honored. I was given the great privilege of just listening, And I'll never forget, one of the fellows went up to the mic and he said, there's a lot of talk about reparations, how we can receive reparations for the wrongs that were done to us. He said, it's just too bad that white people don't understand. We have to talk reparations because we have no relationship. In other words, if we were to have a relationship, all of our conversations would be different. But because we don't have a relationship, he said, the best we can hope for is to get some money out of this, right? We're never going to get a sincere apology. The best we can hope for is money. And it just reminds me, and I don't say that to say, so if you would just apologize, you could get out of money. But I'm saying, when I was in that room that day, I felt for the first time, I think I felt, what does it feel like to be a group of people who've been excluded by another group of people for generation after generation? And I remember it was empathy. I was able to feel empathy in a way I hadn't before when that man spoke. And all of us need empathy for our neighbors.
Yeah, right on. Thank you for answering that question. We're going to wrap up here. I just want to plug your book in again. Faith After Doubt by Brian McLaren is a must read. It doesn't even matter if you feel like you're going through doubt. There is so much content in there for you to learn from. And if anything, it's great for pastors and therapists to better understand what some of their congregants or their clients might be experiencing. So I just want to thank you, Brian, for meeting with us today and just having a casual conversation about some cultural stuff in the church.
Well, I'm so glad you're doing this podcast, because podcasts are creating space for people to think new thoughts. What you just said about race, when you think about it, it involves white people doubting that they have all the answers. and it's only when they doubt that they already have all the answers that they'll be able to listen from the heart and learn. And this applies to so many things in life. So thanks for your good work too.